The crystal flute didn't just shatter against the marble floor, it disintegrated, 1,000 jagged diamonds spraying across the white stone like a warning I was the only one capable of hearing. I watched the amber liquid soak into the grout, a slow-moving stain that mirrored the rot I felt spreading through my own life. Around me the room remained loud, oblivious, and suffocatingly expensive. Nobody turned their head. Not a single guest paused their polite laughter. They were too busy worshipping the man at the center of the room, the man whose hand was currently clamped around my waist with the possessive grip of an owner showing off a prize mare. Ethan leaned in, his breath smelling of aged peat and unearned confidence, and squeezed. It wasn't an affectionate gesture, it was a tether. He smiled at the group, our friends, our business associates, our parasites, and delivered the line he'd been practicing all week. "Don't mind Valoria," he said, his voice dripping with a practiced condescending warmth. "She's always been a bit delicate with the details. It's why I handle every financial decision in this house. Someone has to keep the ship steady while she focuses on being beautiful, right?" The table erupted in synchronized, sycophantic chuckles. I stood there, a 35-year-old woman at my own birthday celebration, feeling the phantom weight of a porcelain doll's mask hardening over my features. I was the guest of honor, yet I had never felt more like a ghost. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who claim to love you only to realize you're actually standing in a cage they built together? My name is Valoria. It's an old name, a heavy name, one that my grandfather insisted upon because he believed that ordinary names create ordinary lives. He was a man who carved an empire out of oil contracts and raw, unadulterated stubbornness. He was the kind of man who looked at a desert and saw a kingdom. When he died, he didn't leave that kingdom to my father, or to a board of directors, or to the man I had married. He left it to me. Every pipeline, every contract, every cent of a multi-million-dollar inheritance was mine by blood and by law. And yet, over the last 3 years, Ethan had performed a slow-motion heist of my identity. It started with helping. He suggested consolidating the accounts for simplicity. He talked about streamlining assets to maximize growth. He placed himself as an authorized manager for convenience. He made me feel like my grandfather's legacy was a burden too heavy for my feminine shoulders to carry. He didn't steal it with a gun. He stole it with a smile and a series of "sign here, honey" documents. But as I looked at the shattered glass at my feet, the spell finally broke. I realized that convenience is just another word for invisible handcuffs. By midnight, the house was silent. The caterers had vanished, the guests had retreated to their own hollow lives, and Ethan was snoring in our master suite, dreaming of the power he thought he had successfully domesticated. I didn't go to bed. I walked down the long, shadowed hallway to my grandfather's old study, a room Ethan rarely entered because he found the smell of old leather and tobacco unrefined. I sat in the heavy oak chair that still smelled of the man who built my world. I opened my laptop, the blue light reflecting in the dark wood of the desk. My fingers were cold, but they didn't shake. Over the next 4 hours, I worked with the precision of a surgeon. Every dollar, every stock, every offshore holding that had been consolidated into Ethan's reach was systematically moved. I funneled the entirety of the inheritance into an irrevocable trust, a legal fortress that I alone controlled. It was a digital scorched earth policy, quietly, legally, and with a finality that felt like a heartbeat returning to a dead body. I reclaimed my life. I slept for 3 hours, and it was the most profound rest I had experienced in a decade. At 7:12 a.m., the peace was violently punctured. A frantic pounding on my bedroom door pulled me from a dream of open oceans. When I opened it, I didn't see Ethan. I saw my 14-year-old son, Rowan. He was pale, his hoodie rumpled as if he'd been sleeping in it, and his eyes were wide with a fear that a child his age should never have to taste. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. He's really mad. Grandma brought me home. She told me to stay in my room. But I heard them. I looked past him, down the grand staircase. In the driveway, I could see the sleek, predatory silhouette of my mother-in-law's black SUV, Clarice. She never arrived this early unless there was blood in the water. "Did you hear what they were saying, Rowan?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as a horizon line. He nodded, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Grandma said you were making a catastrophic mistake. Dad was shouting about the accounts. He said you'd regret moving the money. Mom, what did you do?" I pulled him into a hug, feeling the tension in his small frame. That's the thing about betrayal. It's never contained to just two people. It bleeds into the carpet, it stains the walls, it scares the children. Ethan had tried to access the funds this morning, likely to finalize some deal he'd hidden from me, and he'd hit the wall I built. I didn't do anything wrong, Rowan, I said, pulling back to look him in the eye. I just reminded them who actually owns the house they're standing in. I watched the SUV idling at the curb from the upstairs window. Clarice sat inside, a woman who had spent 30 years teaching her son that women were resources to be mined, not partners to be respected. 3 years ago, she was the one who whispered in my ear at my grandfather's funeral, telling me that, Ethan has such a head for figures, dear. Let him take the stress off you. I had been grieving, I had been vulnerable, and they had moved in like scavengers. But as I watched her car finally pull away, I realized something much colder than fear was settling in my chest. They hadn't just planned to manage my money. They had planned my total, absolute dependence. They wanted me to be a ward of the state of Ethan, and they had just realized their golden goose had grown talons. The front door didn't just open that evening. It was an act of violence against the hinges. The hallway mirror, an antique from the 1920s, rattled against the wall as the house shuddered. I stayed in the kitchen, slowly stirring a cup of tea I didn't intend to drink. I wanted him to find me in a domestic setting, looking delicate one last time. Ethan stormed in, his tie loosened, his face a shade of mottled crimson I had only seen once before. You embarrass me, he hissed, slamming his briefcase onto the granite island. The sound was like a gunshot. Do you have any idea what you've done? I was in the middle of a bridge loan meeting, Valoria. My card was declined. My access was revoked, in front of my associates. I protected what's mine, I replied. I didn't look up from my tea. His jaw tightened so hard I heard the bone click. Yours? We are a team. We are a family. What's yours is ours. That's how a marriage works, or have you forgotten the vows you took? I remember the vows, I said, finally meeting his gaze. My calmness was a blade, and I could see it irritating him more than if I had screamed. I remember the part about honesty. I don't remember the part where I sign over my grandfather's life's work so you can play venture capitalist with a safety net. He stepped closer, looming over me. He wasn't a physically violent man, but he used his height like a weapon. A shadow meant to dim my light. You don't understand how these structures work, Valoria. Moving assets of this scale without consulting me. It's reckless. It's unstable. You're acting like a child playing with matches. Reckless, I repeated, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. For 3 years, Ethan, I signed whatever you put in front of me. I trusted you with my legacy because I thought your love was the one thing I didn't have to audit. Now, because I want a key to my own vault, I'm reckless? He paused. The air in the kitchen shifted. It wasn't the heat of an argument anymore. It was the cold, clinical silence of a predator recalculating. He didn't look hurt. He looked busy. His eyes were darting, searching for the next move. This wasn't a husband upset with his wife. This was a manager who had just lost his primary client. You really should have checked the secondary accounts first, he said quietly. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning washed over me. Secondary accounts? Ethan smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of a man who had kept an ace up his sleeve for 3 years and was finally ready to lay it on the table. He walked over to the bar, poured himself a double scotch and took a slow, deliberate sip. Relax, he said, his voice returning to that smooth, condescending lilt. You locked the primary inheritance trust. Fine. It's a bit dramatic, but smart, I suppose. It shows you're learning. He turned to face me, the glass sweating in his hand. But expansion capital doesn't sit in one place, Valoria. It moves. It breathes. It's leveraged. You might have the principle, but the growth, the liquidity, that's already out in the world. And it's tied to things you can't simply undo with a password. He left the room without another word, leaving me with a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. Desire whispers louder than guilt, and I realized in that moment that Ethan's desire for power had completely silenced any guilt he might have felt for betraying me. The next evening was the charity gala, Clarice's favorite stage for social theater. I didn't want to go. I wanted to crawl into a hole and read every bank statement from the last 1,000 days. But I knew that if I stayed home, I was admitting defeat. I put on a dress that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, painted on a smile that felt like cracked porcelain, and walked into the ballroom on Ethan's arm. He was the picture of the perfect husband. He checked my coat. He brought me champagne. He leaned in to whisper jokes in my ear. To the outside world, we were the golden couple, but every time his hand touched my back, I felt a jolt of revulsion. Have you ever had to play the part of a happy wife while you were internally calculating the cost of a divorce that could ruin you? Suddenly the lights dimmed. The chatter died down to a dull hum as Ethan was called to the stage. He took the microphone with an effortless grace that made my skin crawl. "Thank you all for being here," he started, his voice projecting a false sense of humility. "As many of you know, our family has always believed in building for the future. Tonight, I'm proud to announce a new chapter. We are launching a joint investment venture, the Valoria Heritage Fund, focused on sustainable urban development." The screen behind him erupted into light. Projected figures, architectural renderings, and complex growth charts filled the room, and there, in the center of the first slide, was my grandfather's estate name. "We've leveraged our structured assets to anchor this project," Ethan continued, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. He was daring me to react. "It's a legacy project, one that Valoria and I have developed together to ensure her grandfather's vision lives on." The applause was deafening. Clarice appeared at my side, her hand gripping my forearm with surprising strength. She leaned in, her perfume cloying and sweet. "Valoria has always trusted Ethan's judgment so implicitly," she said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "It's truly a partnership of the soul." The room turned toward me. Faces I'd known for years were beaming, waiting for me to nod, to clap, to validate the lie. My pulse was a rhythmic roar in my ears. He had done it. He hadn't just used my money, he had used my name as collateral in a public forum. If I stood up and called him a liar right now, I wouldn't just be hurting Ethan. I'd be signaling to every investor in the room that the project was a sham. I would be destroying the very legacy I was trying to protect. I did the only thing I could do. I lifted my glass. "Ethan has always been ambitious," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. The room laughed softly, taking it as a compliment. Ethan beamed. Clarice squeezed my arm in approval. They thought they had trapped me in the cage of public opinion. But they forgot one thing. My grandfather didn't build an empire by being loud. He built it by being prepared. Strategy is silent. Panic is loud. And while Ethan spent the rest of the night basking in the glow of his success, I was already back in that dark study in my mind, looking for the loose thread. The morning after the gala, I didn't confront him. I didn't ask about the Heritage Fund or the leveraged assets. I simply waited until he left for his office, then I drove to a nondescript building on the edge of the financial district. I wasn't meeting a divorce lawyer, not yet. I was meeting my grandfather's old attorney, a man named Silas, who looked like he was made of parchment and secrets. I brought a box. In that box was every document Ethan had ever asked me to sign. The streamlined structures, the temporary holding entities, the liquidity repositioning forms. Silas spent 4 hours in silence, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, his only movement the slow turning of pages. I sat across from him, watching the clock on the wall tick away the minutes of my marriage. "He's clever," Silas finally said, leaning back. "He hasn't technically forged a single signature, Valoria. He didn't have to. You gave him the keys." "There has to be something, Silas," I whispered. "He's using my name to anchor deals I never approved." Silas pulled a single sheet of paper from a thick blue folder. "This is an advisory addendum you signed 18 months ago. It's buried under 30 pages of tax jargon. It allows for temporary capital deployment under spousal managerial authority. It's a very common, very dangerous clause for high net worth couples." My heart sank. "So, he can do whatever he wants?" "Temporary," Silas emphasized, tapping the word with a skeletal finger. "That is the pivot point. This authority only exists as long as the underlying assets are represented accurately to third parties. If the capital is misrepresented, if he tells an investor that a trust is collateral when it hasn't been formally pledged, the authority vanishes. More importantly, the liability shifts." "Explain that to me like I'm a woman who's about to lose everything," I said. Silas leaned forward. "If Ethan went on that stage last night and claimed your inheritance trust was the collateral for a new fund, but the trust documents don't reflect that pledge, he didn't just overstep. He committed securities fraud. He misrepresented the financial health of the venture to every potential investor in that room." A slow, cold warmth began to spread through my veins. "And if I never sign the pledge? Then the Heritage Fund is built on smoke," Silas said, "and Ethan is the one holding the match." I made one phone call. It wasn't to Ethan. It wasn't to Clarice. I called the board of directors overseeing the urban development deal Ethan had featured in his presentation. I didn't scream, I didn't accuse. I simply requested an emergency compliance review to ensure my personal trust's participation was in full alignment with their internal risk protocols. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Ethan thought he'd staged the victory of a lifetime. He had actually just scheduled his own public execution. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, mocking brightness. Ethan was in high spirits, humming to himself as he adjusted his silk tie in the mirror. He looked like the hero of his own story. "Big day, Val," he said, checking his watch. "The board is doing a final walkthrough of the capital structure. Once this is signed, we're untouchable. You'll finally see the scale of what I've built for us. You'll thank me then." "I'm sure I'll have a lot to say," I replied, smoothing my skirt. The boardroom was a temple of glass and chrome, perched 40 floors above the city. The air was thin and smelled of expensive coffee. Clarice was already there, sitting near the head of the table like a queen dowager, wearing a suit that cost more than a year of Rowan's tuition. She gave me a tight, victorious smile. The compliance officer, a man with a face like a stone wall, began the meeting without preamble. "Before we move to final authorization for the Heritage Fund, we must clarify the capital representation provided in the preliminary filing." Ethan leaned back, his legs crossed, projecting an image of total control. "Of course. Everything is in the folder. My wife's inheritance trust serves as the primary collateral, as discussed." A different folder was slid across the table. It wasn't provided by Ethan, it was provided by Silas. "We have a slight discrepancy," the compliance officer said, his voice dropping an octave. "According to the most recent filings from the Knox Irrevocable Trust, the assets were moved into a restricted status 3 days ago. Furthermore, we find no signed authorization from Mrs. Knox permitting the public representation of that trust as leveraged collateral for this specific venture." The color drained from Ethan's face so quickly it was almost cinematic. That's not accurate," he said, his voice fluttering. "The advisory addendum provides managerial authority. I have the right to position those assets." "The addendum allows for temporary deployment," the board's senior counsel interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "It does not allow for the misrepresentation of collateral to external investors. If you claimed this fund was backed by the Knox Trust without a finalized pledge agreement, you have violated our disclosure protocols." Clarice's hand tightened on her designer purse until her knuckles turned white. She looked at me, her eyes flaring with a sudden, sharp realization. "Valoria," she hissed, Tell them there's been a mistake." I looked at Ethan. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. For 3 years, he had looked at me and seen a resource. He had seen a delicate girl who couldn't handle the details. "I never approved the public leverage of my inheritance," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "And I have no intention of signing any pledge that places my grandfather's legacy at risk for this venture." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terminal. In that moment, I saw the exact second Ethan realized his world had ended. He wasn't the architect anymore. He was just a man standing in a room full of people who realized he was broke. The board didn't need to shout. These weren't people who dealt in tantrums, they dealt in risk. And Ethan had just become the highest risk in the building. Within 20 minutes, the development deal was suspended. Within 40, Ethan's status as an acting manager for any family-related entity was formally frozen. Clarice tried to intercede, something about family alignment and domestic misunderstandings, but the compliance officer cut her off with a look of pure professional disgust. "This is not a domestic dispute, Mrs. Knox," he said coolly. "This is a disclosure issue. We do not do business with people who lie about where their money comes from." That word, disclosure, landed like a gavel. Outside the building, the sun was blinding. Ethan caught my arm as I reached for my car door. He didn't have his manager voice anymore. His grip was desperate, shaking. "You did this deliberately," he whispered, his eyes searching mine for a trace of the woman he thought he knew. "You sat there at the gala and smiled while you were planning to ruin me." "Yes," I said. His grip loosened, his fingers falling away as if I had burned him. "You're destroying everything, Valoria. The reputation, the house, the future I was building for Rowan. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost me?" I looked at him, and for the first time in a decade, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just the clean, sharp coldness of a debt settled. I know exactly what it's going to cost you, Ethan. It's going to cost you the one thing you never actually had: power over me. Loneliness makes dangerous choices feel reasonable, but I wasn't lonely anymore. I was finally, for the first time in my life, alone in the best possible way. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal restructuring and quiet exits. Ethan was formally removed from his advisory positions. The internal investigation was as brutal as I expected. Investors don't just walk away when they've been lied to. They demand accountability. They demand blood. Ethan's reputation, that polished, untouchable version of himself he had spent years crafting, didn't just crack, it shattered. He moved into a downtown apartment 3 weeks later, not because I kicked him out, though I would have, but because he couldn't stand to be in a house where the walls reminded him of his failure. He couldn't live in a home where he was no longer the master of the details. But the most important change wasn't the bank accounts or the living arrangements. It was Rowan. Last night we sat in my grandfather's study. The room was bright now, the heavy curtains thrown open to let in the moonlight. I was going over the new trust documents, the ones that now fund educational grants for young women in my grandfather's name. Rowan sat in the chair across from me, watching my pen move across the paper. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked curious. "Mom?" he asked quietly. "Yes, honey? Were you scared? That day in the boardroom?" I thought about the champagne glass on the floor. I thought about the way Ethan used to squeeze my waist. I thought about the terrifying silence of realizing your life isn't your own. "Yes," I told him, closing the folder. I was terrified, but I was prepared. Because the most powerful revenge isn't loud, Rowan. It's legal, and it leaves you standing exactly where you belong. He nodded, a small, proud smile touching his face. He's learning, he's watching, and he'll never grow up thinking that love is something you use to control someone else. As for Ethan, he still calls sometimes. He talks about rebuilding, about second chances, about how he always had our best interests at heart. I listen for a moment, then I hang up, because power isn't taken. It is quietly reclaimed. And my name is Valoria. My grandfather was right. Ordinary names do create ordinary lives, and there is absolutely nothing ordinary about the life I'm building now. If you've ever felt like a passenger in your own life, remember that the wheel is always right there, waiting for you to grab it. Would you like me to dive deeper into the legal fallout of Ethan's heritage fund, or should we explore the secret history of Valoria's grandfather to see where she truly learned her steel? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to stay for the next chapter of this journey.